At exactly 12:03 a.m., the Royal Communications Office received a single-line directive from Princess Anne's private desk: cancel the plans. Effective immediately. No reason, no context. Within hours, Camilla's upcoming state visit, months in the making, was erased from the royal calendar. What could push Anne to sabotage a Queen Consort's international agenda? The answer is buried in layers of quiet resentment, private strategy, and a war for royal representation. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The cancellation didn't come with ceremony, it came with silence. Palace officials scrambled to contain the fallout, but by the time the press offices were briefed, the diplomatic world had already noticed. The planned state visit to a key Commonwealth ally had been in preparation for nearly 9 months. Delegates had confirmed, speeches were being drafted, and logistics teams were already en route. Then, in a heartbeat, it all vanished from the calendar. There was no press release, no explanation, just a gaping hole where Camilla's name had once stood. But inside the palace, this wasn't sudden. It was the culmination of something long brewing. Behind closed doors, murmurs had grown into thunder. Princess Anne, revered as the stoic and principled architect of royal duty, had long viewed Camilla's growing influence in foreign affairs as something more than symbolic. To Anne, it was presumptuous, it was dangerous, and it was threatening the very balance of legacy she had fought her entire life to protect. Sources close to the palace say the cancellation wasn't just about the trip, it was about drawing a line. Anne had watched as Camilla stepped into international spaces with a sense of entitlement that Anne, quite simply, didn't believe was earned. And for Anne, the breaking point had come quietly, almost poetically, at a private dinner weeks earlier, where a single phrase reportedly triggered the storm. Camilla represents the crown now. Anne, sitting 2 seats away, reportedly clenched her fork and said nothing. Until now, the cancellation memo was cold, calculated, and surgical. But perhaps the most chilling detail of all came not from the act itself, but what followed it. Within 2 hours of the directive being issued, Catherine, Princess of Wales, was reportedly summoned for a confidential briefing. She left the palace through the underground corridor, used only for private security transitions, flanked not by her usual aides, but by Anne's own senior advisor. For those watching closely, the message was deafening. This wasn't just a cancellation. This was a transfer of power. Diplomatic circles were stunned. One ambassador, whose country was scheduled to host the visit, was so blindsided he refused to issue a formal comment, stating only, "We await clarification." But the silence says enough. Behind that silence, insiders now believe Anne cited "trust in continuity" as justification for the abrupt move, a cryptic phrase echoed in an internal royal dispatch. But what did continuity mean? According to palace veterans, it was code for something far more specific, a shift away from Camilla's reign toward a figure more aligned with tradition, dignity, and the late Queen's original vision. That figure was never Camilla. It was Catherine. But to understand this bombshell, we need to rewind to the silent tensions that have been building for years, tensions the palace hoped would never surface. They stand beside each other at ceremonies, but behind palace walls, Anne and Camilla's icy exchanges have become impossible to ignore. From protocol clashes to personal digs, royal aides whisper of a relationship that deteriorated not by accident but by design. Could a decades-old betrayal explain Anne's ultimate rejection of Camilla's global authority? The tension wasn't born in public, it festered in the silences, in the sidelong glances at banquets, in the polite but pointed nods during Commonwealth briefings. Princess Anne, forged in the unrelenting discipline of her mother's reign, never cared for royal pageantry unless it served purpose. Her mantra has always been duty first, silence second, and sentiment a distant third. In contrast, Camilla's style, casual, affable, often irreverent, has long rubbed against Anne's deeply etched expectations of how the crown should move in the world. But this wasn't just a matter of personality. It was about power, about legacy, and ultimately, about loyalty. Those close to Anne say she's never truly accepted Camilla's presence, not in the royal family, and certainly not as Queen Consort. Behind closed doors, the discontent brewed quietly. Anne believed Charles, in choosing Camilla, had not only risked public perception, but broken an unspoken contract with the institution itself. That betrayal wasn't shouted across drawing rooms, it lingered in every missed lunch, every rescheduled briefing, every frost-bitten exchange at Windsor. One former palace aide recalls a diplomatic dinner where Camilla, seated next to a foreign envoy, made what she thought was a harmless joke about Anne's military stiffness. Anne, seated across the table, didn't even blink. But the next morning, the envoy's planned tour with Anne's charity was suddenly postponed indefinitely. It was a pattern that repeated itself. Again and again. What truly drove the knife deeper was Camilla's growing role in international relations. The Queen Consort, once expected to serve in a supporting capacity, began assuming front-facing responsibilities, hosting ambassadors, attending foreign summits, and even drafting personal notes to high commissioners. Anne, the royal family's most experienced diplomat in active service, was quietly pushed further back. To the public, it looked like royal evolution, but inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, it felt like erasure. Camilla had not earned the authority. Anne insisted she had inherited it by proximity, and that proximity, Anne believed, was corrupting the very spine of the monarchy. The clash wasn't loud, it didn't explode, it simmered. Anne skipped events where Camilla took center stage. Camilla delayed appearances where Anne was guest of honor. The Queen's funeral was the only place where their truce was visible, two women united not by affection, but obligation. And then came the South Africa incident, a critical diplomatic visit where Camilla allegedly overstepped her role, giving a speech Anne had been preparing for weeks. The snub wasn't just professional, it was personal. Anne left the event early. No explanation was ever offered. But that night, according to palace whispers, Anne told her closest confidant, "This ends now." It wasn't just rivalry. It was Anne's belief that Camilla's growing influence was endangering the crown's foundation, and in Anne's eyes, there was only one woman who could restore it. Because as Anne's distrust of Camilla deepened, her respect for Catherine had only grown stronger. The quiet successor, the steady hand, the one who reminded Anne of a woman long gone but never forgotten. But to understand how Catherine earned that unwavering confidence, we must step into the shadowed corridors, where reputations are forged not with words, but with unwavering loyalty. The whispers began as harmless coincidences, Princess Anne falling ill the morning of a joint appearance, a last-minute scheduling conflict forcing her to withdraw from a diplomatic summit, or a private engagement announced just hours before a public event where Camilla was set to lead. But as the pattern grew impossible to ignore, insiders began to piece together a far more intentional narrative. Anne, long regarded as the backbone of the monarchy's international image, wasn't simply unavailable, she was absent by choice, and the events she kept missing all had one glaring detail in common. Camilla was center stage. To those observing closely, it became clear that Anne was making a statement without uttering a word. Each coincidental absence carried a sharp undertone of refusal, a refusal to legitimize Camilla's expanding role on the global stage. Anne had dedicated her life to representing the monarchy with discipline, decorum, and distance from drama. So to see Camilla, once the most controversial figure in the royal family, now conducting international affairs as though born into it, was a shift Anne simply couldn't reconcile. And beneath that simmering discontent lay an even deeper worry, one that had less to do with Camilla's presence, and more to do with the shadow she was casting over someone else. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had emerged over the years as a diplomatic force in her own right, elegant yet calculated, warm but precise, admired by leaders who didn't easily give praise. Yet despite Catherine's growing record of international success, Camilla was increasingly positioned as the monarchy's primary face abroad. To Anne, this wasn't just poor optics, it was dangerous strategy. Elevating Camilla risked suffocating the credibility that Catherine had painstakingly built. threatening the monarchy's long-term vision in favour of short-term appearances. In Anne's eyes, the crown was drifting from the discipline that had once defined it, and the blame pointed in one direction. Then came the South Africa debacle, a moment that transformed frustration into fury. The event had been arranged with Anne as the key royal representative. She had spent weeks preparing, liaising with foreign officials, crafting a speech that would honour the country's post-colonial relationship while reinforcing the crown's modern vision. And yet, in a stunning 11th-hour shift, Camilla appeared in her place. The change, according to internal sources, was orchestrated without Anne's knowledge. The speech she'd drafted was rewritten. The event's entire tone was recast. Anne flew home early. No official word was given, but those close to her said the damage was irreversible. It was around that time that a trusted palace aide, one of the few still loyal to Anne through the thickening frost of royal politics, spoke candidly. "Anne doesn't believe Camilla embodies the crown," the aide said. "She believes someone else does." It wasn't a passing remark, it was a declaration. Anne, the royal family's most unflinching enforcer of tradition, had made up her mind. Camilla, to her, was a placeholder, a distraction, an error of timing. But the future, Anne believed, belonged to someone who had waited, watched, and endured, someone who had earned her seat not through scandal, but silence. And that someone else isn't just a name in waiting, she's already taking the reins in ways the public was never supposed to know. For years, Catherine walked 3 steps behind now. She's leading from the front. What began as a ceremonial role has transformed into a shadow authority within the royal apparatus. Trusted, admired, and increasingly decisive, insiders say Catherine was the only figure who could replace Camilla without public backlash. But how did she secure that trust? It didn't happen overnight. It was a quiet ascension, built on grace under pressure, and a relentless understanding of optics, timing, and restraint. Catherine learned to navigate the monarchy not by breaking tradition, but by mastering it. While the world dissected scandals and distractions, she built something unshakable: reputation. Her solo international visits, often dismissed as mere photo opportunities, gradually became case studies in diplomatic mastery. Behind closed doors, diplomats once skeptical of royal involvement began requesting Catherine by name. Her poise, precision, and ability to connect across cultures without controversy made her not just an emissary, but a symbol. The crown had found its calm in the storm. In the aftermath of Megxit, when the monarchy faced one of its most fragile public moments in modern memory, Catherine emerged not with speeches or statements, but with presence. While others lashed out or stepped away, she stepped in. Her appearances, though limited, were sharply calculated to restore trust, visiting communities, championing mental health causes, and attending military engagements with the solemnity expected of a future queen. And through it all, she never spoke out of turn, never courted chaos, never made herself the story. She became the anchor. What few knew, however, was that in the last 6 months, Catherine's influence had extended well beyond what the public saw. Behind palace doors, she began holding private meetings with none other than Princess Anne. Not formal briefings, personal conversations, strategic alignments, late-night discussions in the lesser-known wings of Windsor. Anne, notoriously guarded, had reportedly grown to respect Catherine's discipline. In a world increasingly obsessed with headlines, Catherine's silence had become her loudest statement. Anne, many believe, saw not a daughter-in-law but a reflection of the values the monarchy had all but forgotten. And then came the note. In the Queen's personal archives, one document stood out, a handwritten letter, addressed only to her private secretary. In it, Queen Elizabeth referred to Catherine as the future's compass. The phrase was never meant for the public, but when it was quietly revealed to a select few during a strategic meeting, its weight changed everything. It was no longer about preference, it was about prophecy. That single line cemented Catherine's positioning not just as a royal, but as a rightful heir to the Queen's trust. Meanwhile, Catherine's fingerprints began appearing on larger initiatives, most notably the Commonwealth Education Pact. Though never officially credited, sources confirmed she played a key role in bringing member nations to the table. Her diplomatic finesse had once again outpaced expectations. All the while, she avoided the kind of public pitfalls that continued to haunt Camilla. No leaked complaints, no off-the-cuff remarks, no scandals, just strategy. Camilla, by contrast, struggled to recover from a series of PR missteps, from poorly received comments at official visits to questionable choices in state representation. Where Catherine rose, Camilla stumbled. Now, with Anne's support and a legacy note from the late Queen behind her, Catherine had become more than a royal figure. She had become the quiet cornerstone of the monarchy's next act. And while she never asked for the spotlight, it was beginning to follow her relentlessly. But as Catherine's star rises, Camilla's inner circle is beginning to crack, and one voice from within has just broken ranks. It was a routine staff meeting until a hidden microphone captured Camilla's closest aide, uttering 7 damning words. "She's no queen, not even close." The recording, leaked to the press, sent shockwaves through the palace. Who leaked it, and why? And more importantly, how did this ignite Anne's final decision? The fallout was immediate and absolute. Within hours of surfacing on an obscure European blog known for royal gossip, the audio clip ricocheted across encrypted networks and private journalism circles. By the time it reached senior editors in London, the press office had already moved into damage control. The original post was deleted, the clip scrubbed, but it was too late. The words had been heard, the voices recognized. The speaker was none other than Camilla's longest-serving advisor, a woman trusted with everything from personal correspondence to strategic diplomacy. And her voice didn't tremble when she said it. She sounded confident, calculated, as if she'd been waiting to say it for years. The phrase, "she's no queen," wasn't just a personal jab, it was an institutional bombshell. It confirmed the very thing Anne had suspected all along, that even Camilla's own circle didn't see her as the rightful symbol of the monarchy. But the leak didn't end there. The full recording, though never officially released, was reportedly played in full during a high-level internal review. In it, the aide can be heard referencing a string of decisions made by Camilla that had complicated the crown's forward motion. And at one chilling point, she adds, "Mark my words, if Catherine ever takes full control, it's over for us." That line changed everything. The implication was clear. Camilla's team didn't just doubt her authority, they feared Catherine's inevitability. And that fear had bred dissent, cracks in loyalty, and now, open betrayal. Royal protection officers were immediately dispatched to investigate what was now being treated as an espionage breach. Devices were seized, office quarters swept. One aide was quietly relocated to a private estate for security debriefing, a phrase not used since the most turbulent days of royal crisis. But within Anne's circle, there was no panic, only a final, cold clarity. Sources close to Princess Anne revealed she was visibly furious after hearing the tape, but not because of the betrayal. It was because it confirmed everything she'd warned the family about for years. That Camilla's hold on the monarchy was more illusion than reality. That even within her own team, the cracks were growing too wide to hide. And most of all, that the crown could no longer afford the weight of an unstable figurehead. "This is the confirmation I needed," Anne reportedly said during a private call with a royal trustee. No theatrics, no outburst, just resolution. What made the moment even more consequential was Catherine's unexpected appearance in the same audio, described not with admiration, but apprehension. Her name spoken like a warning, a threat to the fragile equilibrium Camilla's camp had tried to preserve. The irony? That very fear only fueled her ascension. The more they whispered, the more power she quietly gathered. And yet, even as the drama played out in whispers and leaks, the monarchy was preparing for a very public reshuffling. When the revised royal itinerary was published, eagle-eyed analysts noticed a seismic change. Camilla's name was gone, and Catherine's was boldly printed in its place. No fanfare, no explanation. But make no mistake, this was a statement, not a substitution. The palace had spoken. Catherine now leads where Camilla once reigned. In royal protocol, changes of this magnitude are never accidental. And yet, there it was, Catherine, Princess of Wales, listed as the sole royal figurehead leading diplomatic visits to Canada, India, and Norway. This wasn't just about travel. It was a repositioning of power, a visible, undeniable transfer of trust, and it carried the weight of something bigger than scheduling it. Signaled the beginning of a new royal order. For the first time since Diana, a Princess of Wales would head a full diplomatic slate. And this time, she wasn't walking behind anyone. What made this more than symbolic was the language that accompanied it. Official palace releases, once careful to refer to Catherine as a supporting royal, now declared she was representing the crown. The phrase, subtle in tone, but deafening in implication, was a message to those watching from within and beyond. The future queen was already acting as one. And those who had doubted her readiness, or quietly positioned others to block her rise, had been overruled. The crown wasn't waiting for a coronation. It had already made its choice, and in the middle of this silent elevation came a move that turned whispers into conviction. Princess Anne, always measured in her endorsements, issued a rare personal letter of commendation to Catherine, a note that, while not released to the press, was confirmed by palace insiders. It praised Catherine's steadfast devotion, unwavering discretion, and dignified leadership. Coming from Anne, whose standards are nearly impossible to meet, this was as close to a royal endorsement as one could get without ceremony. It was clear. Catherine wasn't being promoted, she was being positioned. Camilla's reaction, though never officially acknowledged, was telling. A scheduled luncheon with foreign delegates was suddenly cancelled without reason. Her diary went dark for 2 full weeks. Senior aides scrambled to adjust her schedule, but palace insiders claimed she had stepped back to reassess. What she was reassessing remained unclear, but her absence was impossible to ignore. In a family where appearances are power, disappearing spoke volumes. Public sentiment followed the shift with remarkable speed. A leaked internal poll conducted by a royal strategy committee revealed something shocking. 74% of respondents supported Catherine's elevation to international representation. Not only was the public ready for her to take the lead, they were relieved. Camilla, once cautiously accepted, now seemed to many like a chapter that had served its purpose. Catherine, by contrast, felt like the future. All of it, the itinerary, the media language, Anne's letter, Camilla's retreat, and the public endorsement converged into one undeniable truth. The palace had recalibrated its axis. But even the public shift wasn't the most devastating blow. What came next would all but seal Camilla's descent. The monarch's signature was unmistakable, but the memo was anything but comforting. When King Charles issued internal approval for Catherine's representation, it bypassed Camilla entirely. Sources close to her say she locked herself in her private quarters for hours, refusing to attend a critical Privy Council session. For Camilla, this wasn't just a political loss, it was personal. The memo, though couched in the soft diplomatic language of the crown, carried a blade beneath its velvet tone. Titled Strategic Realignment for Generational Continuity, it outlined a shift in royal engagements that placed Catherine at the forefront of international representation. What it didn't mention, what it deliberately avoided, was Camilla's name. Not once. Her absence was louder than any inclusion. It was a silent yet brutal confirmation that the royal tide had officially turned. And that decision hadn't come without agony. Insiders say Charles was torn, emotionally exhausted from choosing between the woman he loved and the monarchy he had inherited. But in the end, he chose the institution. Or rather, he chose Anne's counsel. Anne had reportedly framed the transition not as betrayal, but necessity. Her argument was cold, strategic, and impossible to refute. The monarchy could no longer afford sentimental loyalty. It needed a face the public trusted, admired, and believed in. Camilla's reign, Anne said, had reached its ceiling. Catherine, however, had no ceiling. She was the future, and the future could not wait. Charles, with the weight of legacy pressing against his chest, relented. and the ink on that memo became the point of no return. For Camilla, the blow was catastrophic. One courtier, who had worked with her since the early 2000s, described her as visibly shaken, saying she stared blankly for nearly an hour before quietly requesting her schedule be cleared indefinitely. The Privy Council meeting that evening, a vital discussion on international defence coordination, was held without her. Her absence was explained away as fatigue, but those in the room knew the truth. She had been sidelined not just in function, but in spirit. The whispers grew bolder. Talk of Charles's own doubts began to circulate, with some suggesting that he had long questioned whether Camilla's informal style and inconsistent diplomacy truly fit the modern royal mould. Those close to him say he still cared deeply, but care could not overrule duty. As public confidence leaned harder into Catherine's corner, Charles saw no choice but to follow where the institution and his sister was already leading. Within 48 hours of the memo's circulation, royal security protocols and scheduling teams were restructured. Catherine's detail was expanded, her international logistics team doubled, and diplomatic briefings rerouted through her new advisory wing. Camilla's team, meanwhile, was reduced. Fewer meetings, fewer appearances, less relevance. And then, the quietest betrayal of all, her longest-serving aide submitted a resignation. No press statement, no farewell dinner, just a silent exit through the back gate, leaving behind only a legacy now crumbling under the weight of succession. But the chessboard wasn't yet settled because one move remained, and it came from a voice the public hadn't heard in years. Locked away in a sealed archive was a handwritten letter by Diana, Princess of Wales, now verified and dated months before her death. In it, she wrote of her hope for a future where a woman of grace, not scandal, becomes the face of the monarchy. As this letter resurfaced days after Camilla's plans were cancelled, many called it prophetic, others called it fate. The timing was uncanny. The nation was still digesting the abrupt transition of diplomatic power from Camilla to Catherine when the letter's existence was revealed. Initially dismissed as another rumour in the wake of upheaval, its authenticity was confirmed within hours. Handwriting experts from 3 independent institutions matched the script to Diana's unmistakable cursive. The letter had never been published, never leaked, and never quoted until now. It had been tucked away in a private archive, sealed at Diana's request, meant only to be opened when the monarchy begins to change shape. That moment had arrived. The letter was brief but layered with meaning. Diana, always a master of quiet impact, didn't name anyone. She spoke instead of archetypes, of a woman who walks softly but leaves a strong legacy, of one who would never chase a crown, but who the crown will chase. She warned of the dangers of promoting those who sought attention over intention. She hoped that, should the winds of time shift, the family would know where to look for its compass. The words were laced with sorrow, but they carried a hope that seemed eerily aligned with the moment unraveling before the world's eyes. According to sources, the letter resurfaced through a private archivist working under the direction of Princess Anne. Whether this was orchestrated or coincidental remains a subject of speculation, but palace insiders whisper that Anne had known of the letter's existence for years and waited for the right moment to let it speak. And speak it did. News outlets ran headlines not just about the power shift, but about Diana's posthumous voice, seemingly reaching forward through decades of silence to cast a vote for Catherine's destiny. Charles's reaction was never made public, but one senior courtier revealed he took a copy of the letter into his private study the same evening it was authenticated. He emerged the next morning quieter, paler, and more withdrawn than usual. Whatever it stirred in him, he did not share, but the symbolism was impossible to ignore. The woman he had once cast aside had now, through the written word, anointed the one now rising in her place. The media dubbed it Diana's final blessing. The public, already captivated by Catherine's steady rise, embraced the narrative with fervour. In a monarchy where memory is as powerful as bloodline, Diana's words added a spiritual gravity that no press statement could rival. Her voice had returned, not to haunt, but to guide. Now, all eyes turned to the horizon and the state visit that could redefine the monarchy's next century. As Catherine steps onto the tarmac representing the crown, there is no queen beside her, only the weight of expectation and the echo of every woman who was denied this spotlight before her. With each step, a quiet revolution unfolds. But will it last? Or is this just the calm before another royal storm? The cameras clicked, the headlines spun, but all eyes were fixed on her. The first official photographs of Catherine, standing alone as the monarchy's lead representative, swept across the globe within minutes. Dressed not in extravagance, but in symbolism, she carried with her more than duty, she carried decades of withheld legacy. There were no speeches from the king, no public statements from the Queen Consort, just Catherine, standing under the weight of history, as if she had always belonged there. Her presence wasn't defiant, it was inevitable. In her address to an international audience, Catherine's words were deliberate and familiar. Observers noted a striking detail. She echoed phrases once used by Queen Elizabeth II, subtle linguistic nods to a monarch whose quiet power shaped generations. This was not mimicry. It was lineage in motion. And for those who had questioned whether she could carry the gravity of the crown's diplomatic weight, her performance was an answer. Even her critics, often relentless, found themselves subdued. She hadn't just stepped up, she had stepped in. Camilla's absence, once brushed off as coincidence, was now impossible to ignore. During Catherine's state visit, not a single public appearance from the Queen Consort was logged. Her calendar remained blank. Behind palace doors, aides whispered of a deliberate withdrawal, one not forced, but chosen. And then came the shortest but sharpest message of them all. Princess Anne, ever the guardian of royal principles, released a one-line quote that lit up every newsroom. "Duty finds its rightful bearer." It needed no clarification. The world, it seemed, had made its decision, not through decree, but through belief. Catherine was no longer just a royal by marriage, she had become the institution's emotional compass. The final question that hovered, unspoken but understood, was simple. Had the monarchy finally chosen its next true queen, not by blood, but by merit? And yet, the palace whispers never end, because in the shadows of this rise lies a secret none of them saw coming. Just when the royal waters seemed to settle, a confidential document surfaced in a diplomatic archive bearing Camilla's name and a clause that could legally challenge Catherine's new role. Was this planted? Suppressed? Or was Camilla preparing for this war all along? The ending may not be written yet, but the battle is far from over. The document, quietly unearthed in an international policy archive, referenced a formal clause dating back to Camilla's early tenure. It outlined provisions for international representation, tied to agreements made during the formative years of her role beside Charles. The clause, according to legal experts, may not block Catherine's position outright, but it could stall further elevation, complicate protocol, and even delay certain ceremonial transitions. Its language was vague, but its implications were razor-sharp. Almost instantly, speculation exploded across royal circles. Was this Camilla's last hand, one written in ink long before her influence began to wane? Some palace aides whispered of it as her insurance policy, a move laid down not in bitterness, but in preparation for the very shift now unfolding. Others, however, called it desperation, a relic from a time when Camilla believed the crown could be secured through quiet contracts and careful arrangements. Princess Anne, when asked privately about the document's legitimacy, is said to have responded with a shrug and 5 cold words, a relic of a past moment. But not everyone was as unfazed. The legal teams behind the scenes had already begun cross-referencing precedents, checking for cracks, probing the fine print. Because even if the clause didn't hold legal weight, it held narrative power. It gave Camilla a shadow of leverage. And in the royal court, shadows often speak louder than light. Catherine, true to form, offered no public response. Not a word, not a glance, not a single note from her team. Whether her silence was strategic or shaken remains a matter of interpretation, but her quiet refusal to engage echoed through the palace like a warning. If this was a test, she would not break formation. Not now. Not when the world had begun to believe in her reign. In this monarchy, silence is rarely the absence of strategy, it's the beginning of the next storm. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.